Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We have Carl Teichrib back with us again, and Carl, this time we're going to get into something that you're, for better or worse, known for, and that is the New World Order. So how do you talk about that? How would you define that? I know you always want to do something with the terminology, which is good.
Yes.
Get us to think about that. So get us into the subject.
First of all, most people think of this as just being conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy talk. It's all over the web. It's a meme in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. The term the New World Order has a definite history. Mm-hmm. There is an understanding of what it means. This is not conspiracy. It's actually not even fringe. There is a cultural amnesia that makes it appear that way. But as you dig into the history of the concept behind the New World Order, the idea of global governance,
mm-hmm.
global government, you realize that no, this is a big deal, and this is a reality.
So with respect to the West, when does this sort of enter into history in a meaningful way?
In a meaningful way, before World War I.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'll back this up a little bit because everybody thinks George Bush Sr. was the one who coined the phrase. I've heard this lots because he used it an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
Before
HW, right?
That's right, right. Before he went into Kuwait, he spoke of a New World Order. He's well known. In fact, you'll find clips of him all over the web with his New World Order talk. Before him, Reagan used the term. Before Reagan, Jimmy Carter used the term. FDR used the term. If you go back to World War I, men like Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia University, a man who was Mr. International. He could walk into the office of presidents, prime ministers, kings, and queens. He was a very, very influential player. He threw the term around. He understood what it meant. It had a meaning already going before that. It was understood between 1900 and 1914. There was talk of a New World Order. Books were published on the topic of a New World Order, using that phrase exactly. I can trace it back to 1873 with the founder of the Baha'i Faith. That's as far as I can take it in its modern context. And he understood the New World Order to mean the oneness of humanity, that humanity is all essentially uniting and coming together as one and should be moving in that direction. There should be a unification of religions. There should be a unification of politics. There should be a unification of cultures and social thinking. And the Baha'i International Community, which is the NGO non-governmental side that goes to the United Nations, they understand that what a New World Order looks like is a world moving into oneness.
So you wouldn't think that people have swapped in globalism now for it, because you likely could have used that way back when.
Yes, you could.
And people would have understood it was a synonym.
Right.
But does globalism sound to the average ear less conspiratorial or less sinister?
It sounds more academic.
Okay.
It sounds more economic.
All right.
Yes. The phrase New World Order has that sinister feel. It has that has a sensationalistic side. Yeah,
when you think of globalism, and if you do think commercially, you think of Amazon or something like that, or the internet. You buy things from all parts of the world, and all people in the world can buy things from this central place.
Right, and if you think about it from it may be more of an esoteric level, you'll be thinking about it like through the lens of the World Trade Organization or through regional development banks. They're all engaged in globalism, and of course, right now, as we're taping this, Paris has been in the news because of the riots in Paris, and the question is this is a clash between nationalism and globalism, with the carbon tax and their fuel taxes being that trigger point that set this off. But there is a certain amount of overlap between the two understandings of globalism and the New World Order. But the New World Order really has always been understood as a reshaping of the global norms. in terms of politics, in terms of culture, in terms of it can be taken very, very broadly, very broadly. But it always has this impetus of oneness, this movement towards a unity, a movement towards harmony. And it's almost always had a governmental side. It really has more of a push towards a governmental understanding of bringing about some type of world peace, some type of world harmony through politics.
Yeah, if you're in a discussion and the talk is government, it sounds oppressive.
Right.
But if you're in a discussion and you're talking about open borders and people should be allowed to live where they want, and
right.
In other words, anti-nationalistic talk that is again marketed as compassion, again, it's very easy to do that.
Yep.
Then it sort of strips it away, strips that sinister feel away, and it becomes more palatable. Just sort of a way we can talk about this without scaring people or scaring each other. So do you think there's really something to that? There's an intelligent, again, this traverses a little bit into the conspiratorial realm.
Sure.
But there's sort of an organized agreement or campaign where people who really care about this on a geopolitical level, whether that means technology or money or commerce or government or control or whatever, that they've sort of all agreed on talking points. Do you think there's something to that?
I was a part of that.
Okay.
Personally.
All right.
I absolutely know it exists because I was there.
All right. Tell us about that.
I'll just give you one example.
Okay.
I can give you a number of examples, but probably the best example was when I attended the United Nations Millennium Forum. I attended that in the year 2000. That was in the spring of the year 2000. And of course, the year 2000 was meant to be a transition year on so many levels. It was supposed to be a transition year. So the United Nations had a number of major events that took place over that 12-month period. The UN Millennium Forum was bringing together non-governmental organizations, and we had, I think there was 1,200 representatives of just an amazing array of non-governmental organizations. For the lack of maybe of going into a great amount of detail what that means, special interest groups, okay? Academic special interest groups, civil society special interest groups. These are groups that have a vested interest in the narrative of one world or global governance or whatever that right. Circle is.
There's either some way, the group sees some way to benefit from this,
right,
or some way to be at the forefront of it for benefit in
right.
some way.
Right. And the United Nations also receives a benefit in that those NGOs legitimize the UN.
Yeah.
It's reciprocal.
Right.
And so the United Nations Millennium Forum was one major event during that time period. And I attended. Back then, I attended as what I thought was that I was being brought on as an independent expert. I found out when I arrived at the event, no, there was other reasons why I was there. So in 1999, I attended a youth-based meeting of the World Federalist Association. It's gone under different names. Now it's Citizens for Global Solutions, but back then it was the World Federalist Association, which is the longest-running pro-world government lobby group in the United States. They've been around since the 1940s. The embryo of their current organization, how it was structured back in the 1940s, was very involved with helping to birth and shape the United Nations. They work closely with the State Department. They work very closely with the United Nations, or what would be called the Bretton Woods organizations, which is the UN, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, World Bank, that whole umbrella group. And so I had gone to a few of their meetings back in the late 1990s. Okay, I'd gone to a number of their meetings, and in this particular meeting, the event went off well enough that the president of the organization said, "Hey, we want to make everybody who attended this event an honorary member." So I got a card. I'm now part of the club.
Right.
And so when I put my application, because there's a process, it's not just simply showing up at the United Nations.
Right.
I mean, there's security clearance,
Sure.
They're taking your picture, there's all kinds of stuff going on to get in, okay? Now probably even more so. So I put my application in, and in my application I said I was a member of the World Federalist Association because I was. I had this membership, I had the card. So I show up, and turns out the accrediting committee for that United Nations event was the World Federalist Association. It was the World Federalist community. When I showed up to sign in, to register, everybody behind the table were people I knew from previous World Federalist events. In fact, one of them even said to me, he said, look, if all of a sudden you got a problem with your paperwork, just come to us. We'll make it all happen. And so I walked in thinking, I am on my own. No. There was probably 24 of us who were independents, who were all attached in some fashion to the World Federalists, besides their own players at the event, it was stacked. We ran the event. And I'm saying we because I was part of it. We ran the event. So I worked with Subgroup 6. And I bring this out in my book. Subgroup 6 was restructuring.
Sounds like a SEAL team or something.
Yeah, kind of. In a sense, it's kind of it's an NGO SEAL team, you know? Yeah. We're all coming in to do this hard task, to get right down to the nitty-gritties. And yeah, in fact, there's some pretty intense discussions. Subgroup 6 was restructuring world order. That was our goal. That was what we were designed to do. And so we talked about creating things like a carbon tax, global currencies, and yes, the two are connected. We talked a lot about creating what was called back then a Global People's Assembly, which would be a type of United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. How we could all dovetail this into the broader and the higher dream of world government, including things like a United Nations standby force, creating a United Nations intelligence agency, lots of schemes. We went through a lot of different ideas. One of the things that was kind of interesting from a personal story perspective was over the course of the week, I had been rubbing shoulders with this very nice young lady from a different country. I won't say which nation she was from. And we just hit it off well during our daily plenary sessions. And after each plenary, then we go off to our different subgroups to do our stuff. And I think it was on Thursday she came to me. She says, Carl, where are you going? She says, my subgroup has broken down into just details. And it's getting really boring. I said, hey, I'm part of this other subgroup. Come with me. So she did. And that was the afternoon that we were working through what a world parliament would look like and how to bring about a world assembly. Either attach it to the WTO, attach it to the United Nations, or to some other agency. And it got heated. It was a really intense event. We probably had a couple of dozen different world order groups, all of them having their own agendas, all of them having their own desires for how to bring this about. And it got pretty heated. I mean, really heated. To the point where the girl who was with me, she was physically shaking. She had no clue what she had stepped into, and she was literally shaking. And the moderator stopped and said, you've got a problem. And at that point, she realized, shut your emotions down, just sit. And she did. She just said, no, I'm okay. Later on, we walked out together, and she was muttering under her breath in her foreign accent, this is the beast. This is the Antichrist. And I'm like, girl, are you a Christian? Yes, I am too. Why are you here? We need to talk.
Right, we
need to talk. So I bring that story out in the book.
For real now, yeah.
I bring that story out in the book. But all that to say is, no, we weren't conspiring. We weren't conspiring at all. All of this was out in the open. You could have gone, or at the very least, you could have accessed the material that we were accessing. You could have certainly accessed the working papers that were being put out by the organizations sponsoring events like this. None of this is hidden.
So where, for someone listening to this, they'd say, I'd like to read about meetings like that.
Right.
Okay, where would they find this material?
Great question. Where would they find this kind of information? First of all, you have to know which organizations actually are legitimate and which ones seriously are engaged in this type of work. And then sometimes it's as simple as asking. Back when I was doing my initial research to try to grapple with what does this look like? What does this mean? And this is back in the 1990s, I was wrestling with this in a significant way. I found that sometimes the best thing for me to do was pick up the phone and call certain organizations and entities that I knew had a stake in this game. In my case, the very first one I ever called was the Canadian federal government. In 1995, my government put together a working paper called Toward a Rapid Reaction Capability for the United Nations. And it was going to be our foreign affairs platform for 1995. And in it, the discussion on that paper was, we need a global tax. We need an international authority. We need the United Nations to be armed with its own military capability. We need all this to operate under the jurisdiction of world law. You're now talking about world order.
Sure, yeah.
Flat out. And it wasn't a conspiracy. I read about it in the Winnipeg Free Press first when it came out, or the newspaper for my provincial capital. We didn't hide it. There's no smoke-filled rooms
nowadays,
full of guys in shady coats.
Do these agencies have websites where they archive their material?
Yep. So the Citizens for Global Solutions is the World Federalist group. You can go and peruse through the archives of the Brookings Institute.
And they're probably going to have a little about section that gives their history, so you'll know when they changed their names and all that kind of stuff.
Right. The World Federalist movement still exists. It's still one of the largest pro-world government lobby groups in the U.S. And by the way, there is the important thing that we need to actually talk about in terms of the conspiracy side is when did this become conspiracy? Because in the 1940s, if you and I had been around in the 1940s, we would recognize that this wasn't conspiracy. This is being talked about in the culture. So much so that churches were on board. The Northern Baptist Convention had World Order crusades.
Oh, sure. I mean, you've got the League of Nations.
Right.
I mean,
the Methodists had a World Order crusade.
Right.
The Southern Baptists put out a position statement supporting world government.
Sure.
In the 1940s, there was, I think, something to the effect of 45,000 members in the World Federalist community. I mean, yeah, this was the thing to do because they saw this as being the road to our salvation.
So when did this become conspiracy? When did it become cartoonish? Okay.
It became really cartoonish. Really, it only became cartoonish in the 1990s in a significant way. 1980s and 1990s.
So take us back to the 50s then.
1950s, what happened was two things. The Korean War, where we realized that, the Soviet Union and the West, we don't really get along. The idea of a world order where we all get along as one family, it's not working out. It's not practical. The United Nations itself didn't become empowered the way it was originally hoped. And all of a sudden, the hard reality of warfare demonstrated that we do have a divide. We're not one. We're not coming together as one. And so that created, at that point, a disillusionment in that idea. The other thing that happened was, of course, right with it was the Red Scare. McCarthyism, we ended up, and by the way, there was legitimate reasons for the Red Scare.
Sure.
Because it was a Cold War. We forget that. We're on this side of the Cold War. And I think especially for the millennium generation, they have a hard time connecting that historical dot. And so by the 1950s, there's already a lot of people stepping away from this idea going, I don't want to be associated with the commies. I don't want to be associated with undercutting my own country. I don't want to be associated with undermining national sovereignty. And so the general population pulled away from that movement. And they all of a sudden that was no longer the thing to be a part of. Except the elite community, the academic community, especially those involved in the diplomatic side, those involved in political science, they still stayed there. They stayed within that worldview and that mindset. And so now the culture is disconnected from the hard-nosed politics of that movement, which still exists. Now it all of a sudden becomes elite. The public side faded out. It went away.
Yeah, so we have this great enemy now. We have to circle the wagons here.
Right. And so by the 1980s, by the 1990s, I mean, it was our grandparents' generation that back in the day went, yeah, we're all for this. And by this point...
And the globalists more or less had to keep it running
because it's
among
always,
themselves.
Right, and it always has been run among themselves to some extent. I mean, who are they? Well, they are the World Federalist Association, the World Federalist Movement. They are in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the Club of Rome was birthed, and they had the same kind of hope and aspirations. And the important thing to understand with all of this is, while we can talk about the hard politics and kind of like the history of it all, there's a hope. And they see this as a hope. They see this as a sense of a type of heaven on earth. We're moving towards a goal. We're moving towards some goal. We're looking for some way of bringing peace to mankind. Now, it's noble sounding, isn't it? We want peace. But this is, I have to bring this back a bit, the caricature of it really, again, that's 1980s, 1990s, especially with the internet in the 1990s and the later part of the 1990s.
The caricature would be things like secret societies,
Right.
and and not that you don't have people, not that these things don't exist, and you've got people who believe that they're part of this or that bloodline, because you're
Right.
always going to have people who think that way.
Right.
But the idea that these are the real movers and shakers as opposed to the ones who really are.
Right, right. And see, for myself, and I'm good. All I can do is take it from my research work.
Mm-hmm.
I tackle it where I can document it.
Mm-hmm.
I tackle it where I can prove it. What I've just described to you is absolutely provable. It's not a conspiracy
Mm-hmm.
theory. It's business, big business, real business. So I'll just give you two other quick examples of how that kind of plays in. The World Federalist Community, because that's a broad community, but underneath that comes a number of different organizations. I'm going to say we, because I was a part of it to some extent, even though I was kind of an not unwitting part of it. I knew where I was going and what I was doing. I was researching this and to bring out the reality of it for other Christian authors.
Mm-hmm.
And they used my material back in the 1990s. Two things that we birthed: International Criminal Court. That was our baby. That was a World Federalist Community that really brought that about. And they did that working in terms of hardball politics with real government agencies. And yes, the International Criminal Court really does exist. And then the responsibility to protect, which is also known by its acronym, R2P, which says the international community has the responsibility to intervene when a nation is incapable of looking after its own citizens. It's a military doctrine, and it was used by NATO when they went into Libya. So it's not conspiracy, it's big business.
What do you think? You brought up moving into Libya. And if all these real geopolitical forces and players have this common interest, looking beyond the bounds of nationalism.
Right, right.
Why do we have wars? Why do we have conflict? I mean, what's is that orchestrated, or is it just that we have countries fighting now, and then
Right.
this is that people look for means to capitalize on the situation to further some agenda? Which is it?
I take it from the approach of this is human nature, this is our human history,
Mm-hmm.
okay? I don't necessarily see it always as being something contrived. Nations go to war, we always have.
Sure, yeah.
Nations always fight, we always do. People fight, we're good at that. That's the one thing that when we play the game of gods, we really play games of destruction against each other. And we've done that really, really well. Where you see it being capitalized, though, is the ideas that are birthed because of it. So World War I brings about the League of Nations.
Mm-hmm.
World War II brings about the United Nations. And before World War I and before World War II, you already had a number of academics, a number of leading intellectual personalities, organizations that already existed that were all talking amongst each other.
Mm-hmm.
How can we bring about world order? How can we bring this about? World War I comes along, and they realize that here's a crisis of magnitude that requires really a response of magnitude. As World War I brought about the League of Nations, World War II brings about the United Nations, the idea being that whatever global crisis comes along, I'm not talking like a small economic shakeup. We have to have a crisis of magnitude to be able to say we need a solution of magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of interesting in the cultural side of it is there is, just like with transhumanism, there is a serious side,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is the sensational. Then there is all the buzz, the noise, all the internet, rumors and innuendos, and in my mind, the rabbit trails that sometimes are not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're being a little generous there. I would say that typically they're not helpful.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, you're right.
So in view of the conversations we've had earlier about enchantment and
Yes.
The whole transcendent element of transhumanism, becoming what we are supposed to be, like what our destiny is and all that
Right.
stuff. Controlling that process. What's the point here with New World Order? Because it sounds like, those are just these flowery, wonderful things, and this sounds like a clamping down.
Yes.
But is there actually a sort of spiritual,
wow.
theological
Yes, there
thing
is.
to this?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Glad you asked that. The chapter that I bring this through in my book, Game of Gods, is titled The Cult of World Order.
Okay.
Because it is. It has a cult element to it. And that is that salvation is found by us coming together in political unity. Salvation is found in us working together as one. Man's best hope.
Are we saving ourselves from ourselves?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, that's exactly how we couch it at some of these events. The best hope for humanity is the United Nations, or some other entity that might supersede the United Nations to bring about a true type of global peace. This is the hope of mankind, that we will create heaven on earth. That itself has a theological aspect to it. Jean Stapleton, remember the actress Jean Stapleton?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, she was a World
All
Federalist.
the family, yeah.
She was a World Federalist.
Oh, really?
She supported a lot of folks supported World Federalism that you might be surprised to learn.
Edith Bunker was a World
Yes,
Federalist.
yes. So this is what she said. Right when she was right alongside with John Denver, Walter Cronkite was a big supporter. He received a special prize. Hey, Bill and Hillary Clinton both sent letters of support and endorsement to the World Federalist Association when they were giving out their global governance
I'm
awards.
less surprised there.
Yes, yes. So anyways, back to the religious element, that theological, that sense of enchantment. We're looking for a sense of salvation, a higher
We're our
meaning,
own
a transcendence.
saviors,
Yes. This is what Jean Stapleton said when she wrote had a little endorsement for the World Federalist Association. The goal of the World Federalist is peace through unity of government. We must support their vision of oneness in diversity, for it is the salvation of humanity. That is the cult of world order.
Well, in a way, that's logical, because again, if you rule out the external, again, you're back to the oneism.
Right.
And we're no longer talking about things like sin.
Right.
Okay. So the only thing left to be saved from would be ourselves and our present trajectories, and of course demonize all sorts of things that impede world order as the reason for those problems.
Right.
Then, yeah, it's logical, we become our own saviors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
We have a Messiah complex.
Yeah.
Well, let's call it a divine.
Collective Messiah complex.
In my book, I describe it as a divine identity theft.
That's a good phrase. That's a
Yes.
good turn of phrase.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's those are the games of gods we play.
Wow. Well, this has been really great, to have you here again, and thanks for talking to us. I wanted to cover this topic because it has become so cartoonish.
Yes, yes, it
but
has.
there's actually a really serious side, really serious people, again, not doing everything behind, closed doors, but being fairly transparent about it, but operating under the assumption that nobody's going to look.
Right.
So what does it matter?
Right.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Hey, Mike, thank you.
Yep, thanks for coming. And thank you for watching Fringe Pop 321 again. Please, again, visit our website for source information on various topics, all the episodes we do, and please come back to the YouTube page and subscribe to Fringe Pop 321 on YouTube. And if you're interested in supporting what we do here at Fringe Pop, please visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/Fringe Pop 321. And remember, what you know may not be so,